Hi, my name's Karule Tu-Reeon. I'm one of the board members of Sex Workers Alliance Ireland. I wanted to talk to you today about some of the increase in transphobic violence over the last 2 years. There's been several violent attacks on trans people in particularly the last 2 years, and that's coincided with a new piece of legislation that was passed in 2017, the Criminal Law Sexual Offences Bill. And far from decriminalising sex workers, as I was claimed at the time, it recriminalised and doubled the criminal penalties that sex workers face. So particularly for trans sex workers who are disproportionately represented among sex workers in Ireland, and among migrant sex workers and sex workers who are people of colour, there's been a big increase in violence. In the 12 months after that piece of legislation was passed in 2017, there was a 50% increase in attacks on sex workers generally, and a 75% increase in violent instances against sex workers, according to the sex worker safety organisation Ugly Mugs. That piece of legislation was advertised at the time as decriminalising sex workers. In fact, it only decriminalised sex workers working on the street. Sex workers working indoors had the criminal penalties they faced for what's called brothel keeping doubled. You now face a 12-month prison sentence or €5,000 fine, which is a doubling of the penalties that were previously there under the old legislation. So that's made it a lot more dangerous for sex workers. We now also have the Gardaí and the PSNI prosecuting, far from protecting sex workers. In the last few weeks there's been several cases of sex workers being prosecuted both here in the Republic by the Gardaí, and in Northern Ireland there were 2 Romanian women in Kildare who were given 9 months in prison. One of them was pregnant. They were given 9 months in prison by the judge in Kildare. And in Northern Ireland there was another Romanian woman who the PSNI themselves acknowledged was, by their definition, a victim of trafficking, but they were still going to prosecute her and give her a 1-year suspended jail sentence. And sex workers are often have their money and their income confiscated by the police when they're arrested, and if they're migrant sex workers or sex workers of colour, they're in danger of being deported as well. So this year we had the Gardaí and the PSNI marching in Dublin Pride at the same time as trans people who are disproportionately represented among sex workers are facing violence from the Gardaí, from the state, and are more vulnerable to violence from clients as a result of the actions that the state is taking. And I know that there's a few political parties here today who I think were very misinformed when this legislation was being passed, and were told it was going to help sex workers, and in fact it's led to more transphobic violence. And I think if your political party wants to claim that it's standing here today with trans people, it needs to take responsibility and work to change those laws. And I know there's a lot of people in some of the political parties here today who would disagree with their party's stance and are very friendly to and support the rights of sex workers. You have an opportunity and a responsibility, as we all here today have an opportunity and a responsibility. If you want to support trans people, you need to support trans sex workers. If you want to support trans sex workers, you need to push for decriminalisation of sex workers. In 2020, there's going to be a review of this piece of legislation. You will have an opportunity then to push your politicians, push your political parties to change their stance on this issue and work to protect sex workers by decriminalising all aspects of sex work, which will make it a lot safer for sex workers. If trans sex workers can work together indoors and be safe, not at risk of prosecution by the Gardaí, not at risk of, or at greater risk of being assaulted by someone because they're working together with someone for safety reasons, that will make a really big difference. That's something you can do, and if you want to be a trans ally, that's a small step you can take to make things a lot safer for trans people. I just wanted to say as well, this year we're supposed to be celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots in which trans, migrant and people of colour sex workers played a central role. But how much has changed for those type of people in Ireland today if you're still at risk of being locked up by the Gardaí or deported by the Gardaí? If we want to have a real rainbow revolution, there's a lot more work to do, and the revolution needs to continue. And the people who started it need to be put back at the centre of that revolution, because life has not changed nearly enough for them. So I would like you all to encourage to stand with sex workers today and stand with trans people. Thank you very much.